Okay, I want to introduce a topic, but I want to do it by going through with you certain scenarios and hearing what you think about them, how you would react to them, so that we'll have kind of field of experience on the table, and then I want to try to talk about it and see if we can draw some conclusions from it. So here's the first scenario. Up until about 200 years ago, it was common medical practice when someone had a fever to bleed him. They used leeches, or they would cut across and then put a suction cup on it. And the idea was that when you have a fever, there's too much pressure in the blood, and you have to relieve the person of blood. They did that for thousands of years. I want you to imagine a doctor who lived through that period, a doctor who cared about his patients, cared about medicine, wanted to bring health and functionality to the world, did so responsibly, gets old. 2 weeks before he dies, the new research comes in. Oh, bleeding people wasn't a good idea. Bleeding people won't help their health and could hurt their health. How's he going to feel when he hears about the new research? Huh?
Guilty.
Okay, you say he'll feel guilty. Does everybody else agree?
He might feel sad.
He says he feels sad. Sad and guilty maybe not be the same thing, yeah.
Maybe you could feel a little frustrated or upset.
Frustrated and upset, okay. That goes together with sad. What about what he said? Should he feel guilty?
And he harmed people.
Okay, he harmed people. He harmed people.
Did it harm people?
Sorry?
It harmed people, this treatment?
Yes, he bled them because that's what doctors were doing, and that actually hurt them.
I think the question is if that's what was his intent.
Question, what was his intent? So let's see, where do we put blame? Do we put blame on what happened, or we put blame on what he was trying to accomplish? Where does blame go? Because blame and guilt are going to go together, right? If there's blame, then it's right for him to feel guilty. If there's no blame, then he shouldn't feel guilty. So in this case, what should we say?
He did his best. His patients would have wanted him to do it as well.
He did his best. His patients would want him to do his best. His patients wouldn't want him to ignore what the famous doctors say, or ignore what the current practice is, flip a coin in treating them. No. His patients went to him. No one thought that the doctor is God. No one thought that the doctor knows everything and never makes any mistakes, or the whole profession never makes any mistakes. So if his intentions were good and he did his best, if that means that there's really no blame, let's try this out. When you blame somebody for something, couldn't he ask you, well, what should I have done? You say I did something that was wrong, something that was bad. You tell me what I should have done. Given where he was sitting, given where the medical profession was where he was sitting, did he do the right thing? Even though it was the right thing for him to do. Indeed, if he hadn't bled people, then they would have a claim against him. Why aren't you doing what medicine says to do? So, I think what we see here is a kind of disconnect between what you intend, what you think, what your plans are, what your values are. Remember last time we talked about your inner life, right? On the one hand, and what the effect of what you do is on other people. And I'm considering a case here where the effect is bad, but where the inner intent, the inner values are all good. So the first thing we're asking is, when you have a situation like that, is it appropriate to blame the person? So we talked, I'm not going to decide now, I'm just giving you this to think about. And if you think that because he did his best and he did what the profession required, he doesn't deserve blame, and he shouldn't feel guilty, is it still right to say he should feel sad or frustrated or upset? And if so, what's he upset about? What is he upset about? If he's not guilty, can't blame him for what he did, why does he feel bad about it? Yeah.
He's obviously upset about the outcome, whatever the outcome was, and the second thing is subjectivity of the matter. Like, could I have done any better? Could I, for example, with the doctor, could I have chosen any other doctor? Why did I choose this one? Could I have asked for additional research or something like that? Which is, you could not have predicted in the process, but he might have said I should have predicted it.
Okay, but we're taking a case where he couldn't have predicted it and where he did his best and he was up to date in his research, and it just so happened that the whole profession had it wrong and it had bad consequences. If you tell me that in terms of his guilt and blame don't apply because he did his best, he was responsible, he had the right values, the right priorities, and yet you tell me that he feels bad about the outcome, we have to understand what's the feeling bad about. Where does it come from? What does it represent? Yeah.
He's still responsible. It's under his watch. Even though he's not to blame, maybe he's not to blame, but it's still his responsibility.
Well, let's see now. Let's see if we can work with the word responsible. Putting blame and guilt on the side, is that he's responsible. Now, usually, you're speaking post facto. In other words, it happened, and he's responsible for its happening because it happened on his watch. But if you say that to him, well, you were responsible because it happened on your watch, couldn't he say, but what should I have done? Where did I fail to live up to my responsibilities? If you're claiming that I failed to live up to my responsibilities, you should be able to tell me what I should have done instead. If there's nothing I should have done instead, then, in America, there used to be a law, I don't think there is anymore, it's something called strict liability. Strict liability is what you're talking about. They had it for pharmacies. If the pharmacy sells a medicine that's contaminated, the pharmacist is going to jail. He can't check 2,000 bottles, each bottle, to see whether it's contaminated or not. It came out under your hand, you're going to jail. Well, strict liability. Trace it back to the factory, trace it back to the plans, trace it back to the people who provide the raw materials. I don't know, it came from your pharmacy, you're responsible. Well, that's a legal concept, but morally, would we think of him as a failure in any way? Would we say in the future, I can't trust him because he didn't act in a trustworthy fashion? He's not really a nice person? If you can't say what he should have done, then it's hard to hold him morally responsible for the outcome. So this is the problematic that I'm putting in front of you. Let me give you a couple of more scenarios which have the same dynamics, and maybe that'll help, or at least enrich our picture. Here's another example. George has decided to go on a hike, a solitary hike in the forest. It's the San Bernardino Mountains outside of Los Angeles, and he's got a backpack and he's hiking all alone for hours and hours through the forest. It's a warm spring day, and he's enjoying himself. And then, all of a sudden, he comes across some fruit trees. Fruit trees in the middle of the forest. Apple trees, peach trees, pear trees. And there's fruit on the trees. How wonderful. Right here in the forest. So he takes down a few and eats them. He has a bag, he puts them in the bag, and now he's going to continue his tramp through the forest. When, from the bushes, comes another man and says, "Why are you stealing my fruit?" And he thinks, Where are the guys in the white coats? I'm in the middle of the forest here, you know. Yeah, this forest is open for everybody. There's no ownership here. What's the matter with you? And he says, you're stealing my fruit. So George says, I know what you're talking about. This is the forest. So the fellow says, how did you get to this spot? And George says, I walked in from there. The fellow says, show me how you walked. Why not? So he walks back with him. And then at a certain point, the fellow says, where's my fence? Where's your fence? You belong on Mars. What's the matter with you? Let me tell you. Watch. He's going this way. Let's go at a right angle this way. They walk this way, and 50 yards down the way, there's a fence. There's actually a fence. A fence that goes off to the distance, and signs, no trespassing. Now the guy says, turn around, George, 180 degrees, let's go this way. Walk back to the original point, walk 50 yards in this direction. Fence! Going off into the distance. No trespassing. There's a hole in the fence. George happened to walk through the gap in the fence. And the guy says, you're on my private property, and that's my fruit. What is George going to do now?
You bake the fruit.
First of all, I think the fruit that's in the bag, okay, here, I guess it's your fruit. And, before you got here, I did eat a few. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to steal your fruit. As you could see, I didn't know it was your land. But I can see now that it is your land, so I realized that I'm on your land. So, I ate 2 apples and a peach. Here's $5. I'll pay you for it because actually it's your fruit. Is that an appropriate response on George's part? Even though George is responsible and good and kind and just and doesn't take chances, this happened to him completely beyond his control, and just turned out to be that belonged to this other guy. He ate the other guy's fruit without permission. That's called stealing. But he's not blameworthy because there was no responsibility to do anything else. What should he do? Every place he goes, check 50 yards in every direction to see if there's a missing fence? That's not reasonable. So even though you can't blame him, and he shouldn't feel guilty, but what he did was wrong, destructive, something which morality doesn't allow. It's just that he wasn't aware of it. That's why he gives back the fruit in the bag. And that's why he wants to pay for the fruit that he ate, because it wasn't his fruit. Here's the third scenario. 2 parents and a son go through the Holocaust, and they get separated. And at the end, when it's over, the parents think that the son has died, and the son thinks that the parents have died. They don't even look for each other. They end up in America. The son, who's 13 years old, he's young enough to learn the new language, to learn his way about the culture. He gets some good business experiences and does very well. He ends up in Beverly Hills with a mansion, done very well. The parents, who are in their 40s when they come, find it impossible to adjust, impossible to assimilate the new culture, the new economics, and the new language, and they become beggars. They travel from city to city, they get a hitch, and they beg. That's what they do. Now, years later, the parents come to Los Angeles. Well, when you're looking for charity and you come to Los Angeles, you go, among other places, to Beverly Hills. And he, the son, in his mansion, has hours every day for giving out charity. It's posted on the door. So they, along with other people, knock on the door. It's May 30th. He opens the door and he says, listen, every month I have a new charity account. The deposit in the charity account happens on the 3rd of the month. I've used up the May allotment. June 3rd, the new allotment will come in, and I'll be giving out money for the rest of June. So please come back on June 3rd. He doesn't recognize his parents. Why should he recognize? It's been 30 years since he's seen them, and they don't look the same, and he doesn't look the same. And his parents said to him, look, we have a ride to San Francisco on June 2nd. We can't give up a free ride. We will be here on June 3rd. So he says, okay, but other people will, and every month my charity allotment goes out, so I give it to the people who need it when the money is there in the charity account. I'm sorry for you, but it'll go to other people who need it. And he turns his parents away. Anything sad about this? Anything tragic about this? Turning away his own parents? Let me make it even more dramatic. Let's suppose that on June 2nd, when they're traveling to San Francisco, there's a terrible automobile crash, and they die. And some investigative reporter notices that these are immigrants and digs up the background and finds out who they are and where they're from, their identities, and writes an article in Los Angeles Times. And the son reads the article. And he says, they were on my doorstep at May 30th, my parents. I didn't recognize them. And they're dead. I think when you talk about feeling sad, he's going to feel sad. Now, should he feel guilty? Not obviously. What did he do wrong? What should he have done? He has a regular procedure for giving out charity. Every month he gives out a charity to whoever comes. It's organized. He always gives it away. He wasn't saving anything for himself. He wasn't prejudiced against them because they have dark skins. I mean, he just, at that day, came at a time when the charity account was empty. But he's going to feel terrible about it. What this does is show a difference between, as I said last time we talked about your inner life, show a distance between the inner life and the outer life. The inner life determines what you're responsible for, what you're blameworthy for, what you should feel guilty about. But still, we look at the actions that we perform and the effect of the actions as something that we have strong feelings about. Maybe I can make a link to you for you with something else, which is maybe even simpler and more obvious. Let's suppose you're walking down the street and you trip on a fault in the pavement, and you fall on someone else and knock him down. Wouldn't you say, I'm awfully sorry that I knocked you down? Not because I'm guilty. I'm not guilty. I didn't do anything irresponsible. But I'm the cause of something that hurt you. And I'm sorry that I should be the cause of something that hurt you, even though I'm not morally guilty or irresponsible or blameworthy for what I did. We want to have a good effect on the world. We want to make the world a better place. We certainly don't want to cause damage to the world. Well, now in all these cases, you have a certain structure. The person didn't know the relevant facts. Had he known the relevant facts, he would have acted in an entirely different way. The relevant facts determine what the actual outcome was and the fact that it was destructive in every case. This shows you how important it is to know the facts. If you knew the facts, then you might act differently because what you do would have a different picture, would have a different complexion, have a different character. Now there are facts and facts. There are little facts about who this person is and what his state of health is and how much money it will cost to fix the punctured tire and so forth and so on. And then there are larger facts, global facts. The point that I want to make to you is that religious facts have this character. Religious facts make a big difference in what you're doing. And they're parallel to the cases that I gave you. What's the moral dynamic in the parents standing there at the child's door. They're his parents. He owes them. He owes them gratitude for the fact that they brought him into the world and that they raised him. Usually, I'm not thinking of an odd case, the outlier where the parents were monsters. No, the parents treated him well, loved him, supported him, provided for him. He owes them a tremendous debt of gratitude. We, in general, owe responsibility to the parents who bring us into the world. This is what he didn't know. Okay. Now, let's just suppose, hypothetically, that there's a creator who created past tense and continues to sustain all of our existence, who makes possible all of our resources, all of our opportunities, and makes our actions possible. We choose the actions, but he makes them possible. Shouldn't we have a debt of gratitude to the Creator? And then, if the Creator wants something from us, shouldn't we take that seriously? Because we have such a debt of gratitude? See, here we're starting with a fact. The fact that there is a Creator who made the world and sustains it and creates all of our opportunities. If you take that fact on, then your attitude towards your life and towards your choices becomes very different. Same thing true with the forest. He didn't know that it was private property. He didn't know the fruit trees belonged to an owner. Well, if there's a Creator who brought the universe into existence and sustains its existence continuously, then he owns it. There's no clearer case of ownership than creating something out of nothing. Ownership is a difficult concept, and there are tricky cases in the gray area, but this isn't one of them. And let's leave aside now the question, which would be controversial for some people, whether you can own people, even for God. Let's leave that aside. But he owns the land and the airspaces and the galaxies. All those things can be owned, and he owns them. So when the Creator says, I want you to use my world in a certain way, that has moral weight because he's the owner. And the owner gets to decide how his property shall be used. That's part of his moral authority. So if I take seriously the idea that the world has a Creator, it's going to have a big effect on the kinds of decisions that I make because I want to act well. I want to act rightly. I want my actions to have the right consequences. Some people ask, but if you don't know, if you're living with blissful ignorance and you don't know, then you're not responsible because you don't know that they have these effects. That's true. That is true. But suppose you have a doubt. Suppose you've had the good fortune, misfortune, to have met religious people who seem to be fairly intelligent, who seem to be fairly well educated, who might even be wealthy because they made a lot of money. You know, these aren't trivial people. They're not people living in the past. They're not people living with ignorance. And they think there is a Creator and that he is running the world. Can I really be sure they're wrong? Have I thought it through? Have I discussed it with them? And suppose they're right. Then what about what I'm doing with my life? Here's the final scenario. I want you to imagine that you're standing at Sinai. You're standing there with 3 million other people, Jews. And at the appointed hour, the mountain starts to shake. Smoke and cloud both envelop the mountain. There's fire burning at the top of the mountain. There's the sound of a shofar blowing. And you hear words, and you check with other people that all of the 3 million heard exactly the same words. In the midst of all that sound and confusion and noise. And let's say one of the things that you heard is, Saturdays are special. Saturdays are different. In particular, Saturdays have special rules. Would that experience have any effect on your plans for the weekend? Let's say this happened on Tuesday. So, wow, this like nothing I've ever heard of in the whole history of the world is like this. But I have a date to go scuba diving on Saturday. Yeah, okay. He's counting on me. So, okay. We heard the voice, but, or would you say, sorry, I'm going to have to tell him no scuba diving this weekend, not on Saturday. Saturdays are different. Most people that I have asked this question agree that if I had actually been there and heard it myself, that definitely would have changed my plans for the weekend. I wouldn't have been able to ignore it. Okay, but now, does it really depend upon being there? One of the things that distinguishes human beings from human beings from species of animals is that throughout history, animals live the same lives that their ancestors lived. They don't progress. There's no cumulative culture to enable the next generation to enjoy the benefits of what the previous generation created so they can create something new. We don't have to invent the wheel over again every generation. We use the wheels that they invented and we make computers. So, do we really have to experience a fact in order to take it into account and use it to guide our lives? Isn't it enough that we know the fact happened? Can someone say, well, if I didn't stand at Sinai, all bets are off? Suppose we have historical records. Suppose we have a historical continuity and a historical tradition about it. No, if I wasn't there, it's all bets are off. Why? You weren't there when you were born, and still you trust that these people are your parents. Why? Because they told you, because they're credible. So if the revelation at Sinai really took place, that's going to make a big difference in how we live. Because we want to live well. We want our actions to be really good in their effects. We don't want to just get off with, well, I didn't know any better, so therefore it's not my fault the building blew up. We don't want to have that attitude towards life. We don't have that attitude towards life. We want to be a force for good in the world. That being the case, it pays to know the facts. That's the first moral that I want to draw. We're together so far? Yeah.
Everybody just wrote a couple of examples. For example, with rich people or like credible sources. What about most of the rich people, even Jews, who do not follow Torah or just like recognize the Creator, but like limits to Yom Kippur, only to Yom Kippur, and we could say they've been on Sinai, they're doing good, they're going to do it in life, like, so I can also do the same. They're credible in that regard, and also like false prophets, even like who recognize, but recognize in different ways, such as like Christians. They also say we recognize, look at us, like, but they don't have as proven historical record as we do, like in terms of the revelation and so on, but like they still do false prophecy in that regard.
Well, I think you're really answering your own question. First of all, we don't divide people into credible and not credible. Each person is credible on some subjects and will not be credible on other subjects. This is very, very important. In our society that's been going on for more than 50 years, scientists are regarded as the super intelligent, super rational, and therefore they are consulted for their views on non-scientific matters, which is really absolutely absurd. When I taught at Johns Hopkins, we had a guy in the physics department discover a particle. In those days, that was a big deal. Now there seems to be no end of particles, so it's become more common. So, after having been celebrated in the press for discovering a particle, the student newspaper interviewed for him for his views on religion. Really? From a particle to religion? Like, really? So when the interview came out, it went up on the philosophy bulletin board with a caption, see how many mistakes you can find in this. It was primitive. It was childish. Because he wasn't trained in religion. He was trained in physics. Even philosophy of science, Stephen Hawking, who was one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, pledged allegiance explicitly to a dead philosophy of science without any apology. Because he didn't study philosophy of science. He studied science. And if you think it's got to be the same thing, let me give you an analogy in sports. There are athletes, and then there are coaches and trainers. It's not the same job. The coaches and trainers enable the athlete to turn out a better performance. Not every athlete would make a good coach. Not every athlete would make a good trainer. The athletic performance is one thing, and training people to do the athletic performance is something else. Science is one thing, philosophy of science is something else. So you shouldn't let the credibility in one leak over into other subjects where they're not credible. So the fact that a person's rich doesn't mean he has credible views on the revelation of science 3,300 years ago. Ask him what he's read, ask him what he's thought about, ask him with whom he's discussed it. It may be that he has no credibility at all. It's not a question of just being rich. And the second thing is the idea of the historical record. I think that's very important. People can make up stories about the past, certain types of stories, and we know that has happened, whether it's making up stories about other people, about their lifetimes while they're alive, or making up what happened 100 years ago or 500 years ago. People can certainly make up stories. I claim not every type of story, but many types of stories they can make up. So you want to know what's the verification for the particular story he's telling you. I wrote about that in my book in great detail. And it's also on the net in great detail. So we deal with this question. We take everybody's view as something to be thought about and classified. But when you think about it and classify it, you find that the objections of this type are very weak.
Was meant more in terms of the religion, say like actions and outcome. Like when I said that they're rich, it's like in terms of like they living in good life and just say, see, I also believe in God, I live in good life, but I don't do anything that you do for the God, and my outcome is maybe even better than yours.
But you don't know that because you don't know the relevant facts. If God says to the Jewish people, I don't want you to go scuba diving on Saturdays, then the fact that he's happy and healthy and lives a long life isn't a good outcome. It isn't a good outcome because he doesn't know the relevant facts. The relevant facts are the creator of the universe doesn't want him to do that. And therefore it's not going to be good. And there has hidden failures that he's not aware of.
But we don't know what's going to happen in that world.
That's right. But when you know what God told us, then you do know. And he just doesn't know that. He's just ignorant of that. You can't make a judgment about the outcome unless you know the facts. Doctors 300 years ago thought that by bleeding people they made them more healthy. They were wrong. They weren't making them more healthy because they didn't know the relevant facts. They didn't know that. It would tell you, we've been doing it for thousands of years. That's what we do, and we're happy that we do it. But it was dead wrong. So I'm saying that you have to know the relevant facts. And the religious facts are relevant facts. I want to make one more observation before I have to go down to the funeral. I was brought up Reform in America, Reform Jewish in the 40s and 50s, when your grandparents were being born. And one of the doctrines of Reform was this. When you look at the corpus of Jewish information, you have two different types of rules. Some are moral rules and some are ritual rules. Moral rules like don't steal, don't kill innocent people who are not endangering you, give charity, seek justice. And there are ritual rules like don't go scuba diving on Saturdays, and in the spring eat crackers, and in the fall wave a branch of a palm tree, and so forth and so on. And those are rituals. Big difference. A moral rule is very important because if you violate a moral rule, you're immoral, and that's not nice. That's a real failure. Rituals? If you violate a ritual rule, then I guess you're not a ritual. Take it or leave it. Maybe rituals give you a kind of ethnic identification, okay? Maybe that's good for your sense of solidarity with other people. Maybe training in following ritual rules teaches you self-control, it teaches you self-mastery, it teaches you self-sacrifice, and then when you come to a moral decision, you'll make the moral decision in a better way. But other than that, the ritual rules are definitely secondary. And that's where the idea of ethical monotheism came in as a description of a certain type of Reform Judaism. We're monotheists, we believe in God, we live ethical lives, and that's the end of the story. I was brought up with that. Took me a while to figure out that there's a missing piece here. And that is, what about your moral relationship to God? The assumption there was morality is how you live with other people. And God tells you, don't eat pigs. But that's a mistake. If God creates the universe and owns it, when God says to a Jew, don't eat a pig, what he's saying is, they're my pigs. I don't give you permission to eat them. So a Jew who eats a pig is stealing. Even if he doesn't know it, like the guy who wandered into the orchard of the private owner and didn't know it was private and was eating the fruits, he was really stealing. That's why he felt bad afterwards. That's why he paid for it, because he realized he was doing something that shouldn't be done. He just didn't have the information. If a person doesn't understand that there's a creator and he gave these rules, then he thinks not eating pigs is a Jewish stigma, that's all. But if there is a creator, then it becomes a matter of morality, not to use what the creator owns in a way that violates his wishes for how it should be used. Same thing true with gratitude. Let's suppose that someone saves your life. 3 weeks later, he calls you up and he says, you remember me? I remember you. You saved my life. I'll never forget you. Well, I need something from you. Just tell me what it is. If I can do it, you saved my life. I owe you a lot. I need to borrow $5,000. Oh, you need to borrow $5,000. I have $5,000 to lend, but I know that my neighbor lives down the block also needs $5,000. I only have $5,000 to lend. It's you or my neighbor. I'll flip a coin. Is that right? Is that morally correct? To flip a coin between the person who saved his life on the one hand and the person who lives down the street? I don't think so. That is morally grossly inadequate, because he has a debt of gratitude to that fellow. Morality says, if somebody does you a good turn and he asks you for something that he needs, other things being equal, you should do it for him. Most people feel this way spontaneously. If somebody gives you a birthday present, for most people, what do they want to know? When's your birthday? I'm not a sink for your charity. I don't need to be supported for nothing. If you give me a birthday present, I'll give you a birthday present. You're showing me goodwill. I want to show you goodwill in return. So when the Creator says, I want a half hour every morning for you to wear leather boxes and leather straps, with leather straps. And I think, let's see, he gives me my life, my health, my resources, my intelligence, inspiration, and everything else. Do I owe him a half hour with leather boxes and leather straps? Probably. Probably. It's within the level of the debt. Then it becomes a moral obligation to put on tefillin. Not just a voluntary ritual identification with a certain ethnic tradition. It becomes a moral obligation. That means that the whole of the Torah is based on morality. Can't divide it up into the moral and the ritual as if they're two separate categories. All of this comes from taking seriously the facts of the world which determine the significance of what we do. And I think that the bottom line practical consequence of this reflection is that it pays to spend some time investigating whether these facts are real or not. Because if they aren't, there's a risk that at some point or other you'll have the experience of the doctor who, shortly before his death, said, if I had only known better, I wouldn't have bled my patients. And here, a person can say, if I had only known better, I would have lived a different life. This is the bottom line. When you consider the difference between the inner life and the outer life, here's where you care about your outer life also. And I think the caring is appropriate. You want to actually do to do good in the world. Yeah. So, okay, I'll leave the. There's one further application, but I'll leave it for tomorrow. I have to go down now. Those who are going to the funeral. I'll have to.